Well, all right, CMI family, it is so good to see everybody here. And I just want to tell you guys that I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. I know how busy you all are, but I love the opportunity to get to look around and see all your smiling faces on the call today. And so I just want to let you know that during today's training, we're going to be covering one of the most important first steps for community marriage initiatives, and that's listening campaigns and how you can empower your community through active listening. And not only should listening campaigns be one of your first steps, but really it should be ongoing. Listening campaigns they're more than just a method. What they really are is a powerful tool for change, and they really enable us to be able to identify gaps, to understand the challenges that our community leaders and church leaders are facing. It helps us to uncover opportunities that we might otherwise have been completely unaware of or might have completely gone unnoticed. And so when we engage and we really take that time to listen to the community leaders and the church leaders in our communities, we can gain insights that really help to shape our strategies, and they help to shape our goals, and they really multiply our impact. So whether you're just starting out or if you've been doing this for many years, today's content I know is going to be valuable for you. So before we get started, I do want to let you know that the session is being recorded, and we will share it with each and every one of you. And I will also share the slide decks with you in my follow-up email, and we will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of our time together, as well as a time for you to share. And so today we're going to begin with prayer, and I want to introduce you to one of the newest additions to the CMI family. And her name is Brooke Llanos of the Utah Marriage Initiative. And Brooke and her husband, Kevin, were active members of the Fresno Marriage Initiative until moving to Utah, where they took a pastoral position. And they have such an amazing heart for impacting marriages that they're launching the Utah Marriage Initiative. And so Brooke is going to be leading us in prayer today. So Brooke, whenever you are ready, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and pray. Um, God, we just thank you for this time together. I thank you, Lord, for just the wisdom that you have imparted on those leading these marriage initiatives and what you've taught them, God, how you've grown their ministries, how you just multiplied marital help in so many different places all over. I pray that you would just lead our discussion, that you would help us to really take what's said and apply it to our different ministries. I thank you for collaboration. I thank you for the church and how you designed it to work together to make a bigger impact, God. So I just pray that you would help each one of us take something away that we can use in our ministry to just bring you glory, God, and help marriages all across the country, God. And I just thank you so much for allowing us all to be a part of this and the vision that you have given. And so we just give you this time and pray that you are glorified in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much for praying, Brooke. I appreciate you.
No problem.
Well, first on our agenda today is Scott Oltmans of Local Frameworks. And Scott has been in ministry for almost 40 years. He has worn many hats, from children's pastor to youth pastor to care pastor and everything in between. He is my favorite person on the planet, the one who has been my partner in raising kids, my ministry partner, my pickleball partner, the only one who will pick me on their team because I'm so bad at it. He's my exercise partner and really my partner in all of life for the last 33 years, 357 days, and 16 hours. We have our 34th anniversary coming up really soon. And I just can't wait for you to get to hear from my husband, Scott Oltmans, today.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you all for being here today. My objective in this session is to explain the purpose of a listening campaign, what a listening campaign is, and some practical tips on planning and accomplishing a successful listening session. I'll give you a few examples of styles of campaigns that have been tested and proven to be effective. At the core, a listening campaign aims to collect information and insights through a purposeful and focused conversation. These are different from your everyday conversations you'd have with maybe coworkers or family members. For most of you, your target audience will likely be pastors, marriage leaders, and small group leaders. The primary goal of a listening campaign is to develop a deep understanding of the people involved and their hopes for the future. Through this conversation, you're able to identify a shared purpose and common issues. However, we also understand that every church and community is different. So we also listen for what is unique to that specific community. We can accomplish this by the simple act of listening. And that simple act will promote a sense of connection and trust. I once heard a quote I've always loved: "Trust is the currency of the work." This listening process is critical to creating a marriage movement that truly reflects what the couples and families in your community need and want. Remember, you are there to listen. Your aim is to ensure everyone has an equal standing in these conversations and feels valued and heard. For example, you might have a lot more experience with marriage ministry than the group or person you're meeting with. But the purpose of this session is to listen to their needs and discover where they are coming from. Now, let's talk about how it works. I'm going to give you 4 steps on how you will typically set these conversations up and how they will work. First, you need to set the stage. Timing is everything. You want to be aware of the availability of the pastors and church staff. I was part of a pastoral staff for over 20 years, and certain days worked best for the staff to meet with others. Mondays are not the greatest for the most part. They may have the day off, or they are recovering from Sunday. Wednesday, they may have a midweek service to prepare for. Tuesdays and Thursdays are more than likely going to be your best opportunity to meet with staff. As far as Friday goes, most staff are off that day. You want to find a time that works best with their schedule. Just keep in mind, they have a lot on their plate, and you want to honor that and meet with them at their best. You also want to choose a comfortable location where everyone feels at ease. This could be their church, local coffee shop, restaurant, or even someone's home. If you happen to be meeting with a group and not a one-on-one, if possible, invite a diverse group of individuals representing the churches and community and those interested in strengthening marriages in your target area. This diversity ensures a wide range of perspectives and experiences, which will be beneficial as the group begins to plan next steps. And if you're in a group setting, you'll want to set ground rules for respectful and open communication. Emphasize that everyone's voice is valuable and should be heard without interruption or judgment. Okay, our second step is structure of the conversation. You want to start with introductions and icebreakers to help participants get to know each other and feel more comfortable sharing. For example, they would give their name, what church or organization they represent, their position, and what they do at their organization. You can ask an icebreaker question to help get to know each person better. For example, what's one interesting fact about yourself that most people don't know? This helps everyone to ease into the conversation. As you enter the conversation, encourage participants to speak. Make sure that no single person dominates the time. We've all been there before. One powerful way to get a conversation started is by asking a question. You'll want these questions to be open-ended. That way it encourages deeper thinking and sharing. When I share on listening models in a little bit, I'll give you some example questions that can start you off. And all of these questions fit any model presented today. It's important to remember that you are participating in a listening campaign. So, active listening is your most important task. Active listening is the practice of fully concentrating, understanding, responding to, and remembering what someone is saying during a conversation. It involves giving whoever is talking your full attention. If you're in a group session, encourage active listening from all participants, where everyone will reflect on what they hear before responding. This is where setting ground rules in the beginning is very helpful. Use different techniques like paraphrasing and summarizing to ensure they've been understood and show that each person's input is valued. For example, you can say, "What I hear you saying is." Give the speaker your full attention, make eye contact, remove distractions like phones, and focus on what they say. Use body language and gestures to show your engagement. Nod occasionally, smile, and use other positive facial expressions. If you disagree with something they say, don't use a facial expression like rolling your eyes or face palm to convey your thoughts. Make sure your posture is open and inviting. Allow the speaker to finish each point before asking questions or making comments. Be patient and give the speaker time to express their thoughts and feelings fully. Avoid rushing them or finishing their sentences. If something isn't clear, ask questions to gain a better understanding. Can you explain what you mean by? Or what did you mean when you said? At the end of the conversation, summarize what you've heard to confirm your understanding. This can help clarify misunderstandings and ensure that both parties are on the same page. All right, our third step is documenting the conversation. Documentation is an important step to remember. This will help you to reflect back and strategize for the future. It would be ideal to use an audio recorder and record the conversation, but you have to make sure to get permission from everyone involved. If you're unable to do that, maybe you have a partner with you and they can take notes. This will allow you to stay focused on the conversation. At the very least, if you're by yourself, be sure to take notes soon after the meeting. This will help you have a reference to look back on as you plan and strategize next steps. And it would be much appreciated if you would also distribute a conversation summary to all who attended. Our fourth step is the launchpad of sealing the deal. It's the starting point of accomplishing great things for your initiative. Please don't neglect this step. This step is follow-up. Following up after a listening campaign is a crucial step to the success and impact of the campaign. It will demonstrate commitment to the participants. It validates their contributions and helps lay the groundwork for ongoing engagement and improvement. Immediately after the campaign or the session you have, send personalized thank you notes to all participants. Express your genuine appreciation for their time, their insights, and contributions. Your goal in follow-up is to make sure all participants have a sense of co-ownership and shared vision. You do this by involving them in the process of creating an action plan based on the insights and ideas that came from your listening session. Keep the lines of communication open. Plan regular follow-up meetings to track your progress, share updates, and continue the dialogue. And you can also create a feedback loop where participants can provide ongoing input on the actions taken and the overall process. So to recap, those 4 steps are as follows. Set the stage, structure the conversation, document the conversation, and be sure to follow up. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I want to introduce you to a few of my favorite listening methods. You've probably all flipped through a cookbook at least once in your life. Let's say you want to make a meatloaf. You might notice a few different recipes in the book for a meatloaf. Maybe you're courageous and think to yourself that you can take and mix and match ingredients from a few of those recipes to create your own unique version. Well, you could do the same with these methods. Find what fits you, your personality, and what will bring the connection you need with that person or group that you're meeting with. Let's look at 2 of my favorites, and then I have a few more that you can Google and check out on your own if you're interested. Also, remember, you can use any of these questions throughout multiple models or use them to create your own model. Okay, the first one is appreciative inquiry. This was developed by David Cooperrider. Appreciative inquiry emphasizes and identifies what is already working well. It is rooted in the belief that movements grow and change in the direction of what they focus on. Appreciative inquiry asks the question, what is possible, not what is wrong? Appreciative inquiry typically follows a 4D cycle: discover, dream, design, deliver. I say typically because I like to start with the 5D, which is define. And define basically asks, what is our topic? What is our goal? What are we after? Then with something we have to aim for, we move into the first one, discover. The goal of this step is to identify what already is great about relationships and marriages in the community and what the church and community are doing to support these relationships. A question you can ask is, can you share a story about a time when you felt most supported in your efforts to strengthen marriages and families, or where your own marriage and family was strengthened? This puts the focus on what has already been working. And the amazing thing is that they feel good about what they did to contribute to that outcome. The second D is dream. The goal of this stage is to envision the best possible future for marriage. We're dreaming about what could be. Questions you can ask are, what would a successful marriage ministry in our community look like? What activities or support would make it exceptional? You could write these down on Post-it notes or a large poster board. And when you're finished dreaming of what you all desire, you begin the next process of the 4D model, which is design. Now, the goal of design is planning how to turn those dreams into reality. You'll begin to brainstorm and design specific programs, events, and activities that will get you started on accomplishing the end result, which is what you defined earlier. Consider questions like, what steps can we take to create the programs we dreamed about? And who can help us make this happen? This step can also be implemented into your follow-up and your feedback loop. The last step is deliver. The goal of delivery is to implement the design into action. A few action items to begin here are to develop a timeline and steps for launching the marriage ministry. You'll want to include short-term and long-term goals. Establish a way to measure success and gather feedback to keep improving. Again, this step can be implemented into your follow-up plan and feedback loop. That's the 4D model of appreciative inquiry. It's all about discovering what's excellent, dreaming about how to make it even better, designing a plan to achieve your dreams, and making it all happen through delivery. The second model is a powerful one and has been proven to be an effective listening campaign model, and it's called humble inquiry. Humble inquiry is a communication approach developed by Edgar Schein. It focuses on building relationships through genuine curiosity and respectful questioning. It's about asking questions that show you value the other person's perspectives and are genuinely interested in their thoughts and feelings. It's the art of asking, not telling. If you've been around for any length of time, you may have heard Carl talk about the 5 questions he's used in listening campaigns. Humble inquiry aims to ask open-ended questions that encourage the other person to share more. Here are the 5 questions that you may have heard Carl mention. Tell me about what you're doing. How is this part of your personal story? What is the one thing you're most excited about? What's a roadblock you face? What can I do to help you take your next step? Now, be sure to show genuine interest by asking follow-up questions like, can you tell me more about that? Or maybe, how did you feel about that? A big part of humble inquiry is to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers and that others have valuable insights. We need to approach these conversations with an open mind, ready to learn from others. That's where the humble part of humble inquiry comes in. We show respect by listening actively and not interrupting. We're using inquiry to cultivate trust and a deeper connection. Humble inquiry is a powerful tool for building strong relationships. Just by asking genuine, respectful questions, you create a positive and inclusive environment where everyone feels heard and respected. That's the end result of listening well. Those are two of my favorite methods, but here are a few more you can research online to see if they work for your needs. One is called Future Search, Peer-to-Peer, and Conversation Cafe. So, to conclude, I cannot overstate the power of listening. It is a fundamental act that encourages connection and understanding, leading to stronger, more resilient marriages in your community. I advise you to implement listening campaigns into your best practices toolbox. As we listen, we gain insights and affirm the worth and dignity of those around us. Thank you for your time.
Well, all right. Scott couldn't be on the call live today, but if any of you have questions for him, please let me know and I'd be happy to share his contact info with you. And now we get the honor to hear from Mr. Carl Caton, the president and founder of Marriage Initiative. And Carl has years of experience in listening campaigns, and really he is an expert on starting marriage movements and what it takes to build a community marriage initiative. And so you are in for a real treat today. Carl, the floor is yours.
Very good. Okay. Well, that was so great. And I just love Scott. He is such a great team member. We're so excited to have him on our team. He's bringing a lot of great value to our work together. So I'm going to talk about I'm going to put some bookends and surround some of the things that Scott shares. Scott talked about listening and how to do it well. And I'm going to talk more about the context within which listening is positioned. I want to start with a personal story. I made two really good decisions early in my life. First great decision I made, and certainly the best decision I ever made, was to follow Christ. But the second great decision I made was to marry this girl right there. And this is not our earliest picture, as far back as I can go. And all I can say about this picture is I've gotten a lot older and she's gotten a lot younger, or at least a lot younger looking. This is my wife, Kelly, and we've been married 41 years, and we've been having a lot of fun together. Kelly and I, our marriage was based on just a really tremendous friendship. We had such a great friendship, and we had so many fun early years together. But about 5 years into our marriage, 5 couples in our life divorced, kind of all in a really hectic season. It was 2 very close family members and, surprisingly, our 3 closest friends from church. It was a really confusing time for Kelly and I as a newly married couple, and we didn't know what to do about it. I was a home builder, and Kelly was starting out in teaching. And all we knew to do was just to have a lonely person over to our house on Sunday night for a hamburger. But there were also, as we went through those years, there were 3 aspects of the problem and of the pain that we saw repeated again and again. And those were very personal, kind of societal aspects, and the ecclesial nature of the problem. First of all, personal, we just saw this seismic shift happen in families. We saw so much pain and suffering among the kids and the extended family members. The fracturing of families brings so much personal pain. And then we could also see the societal impact, how it was impacting our society or even our community at large. We definitely saw how there was tremendous impacts on our church. And then the third thing that we saw was the inability of our church to make a difference. And it was a real surprise to me as I was kind of reflecting back on this yesterday and even this morning. It kind of surprises me. We were a very prominent church in the city. We had plenty of resources available to us, and there were many ministries in the church that were vibrant and well-funded, but we saw our 3 friends from church, all 3 go through divorce because our church really didn't have a way to step in and support them. And Kelly and I said this. We said, we've got to do something. There's something that we have to do. And one of the first things that we heard about was this thing called Weekend to Remember. And one of my great friends, Keith Tully, is on this call today. And Keith has been serving Weekend Remembers and family life for decades. And Kelly and I made this personal commitment. We said, what would it look like if during our lifetime we sent 100 couples to Weekend Remember? But we definitely got to do something. But over the years, kind of that vision enlarged because we saw that the problem was overwhelming. And this is something we certainly found much later. But even just in our community, there was 400,000 marriages with 80,000 of them struggling. It's a $300 million a year problem in our little big community. And so we saw that the problem just seemed overwhelming to us. In fact, this is what we saw, and this is what we believed really early here in San Antonio, was that the problem was bigger than any of us, but it's not larger than all of us, right? And especially as God is among us. Really early in our work, we said, we believe God desires to redeem and restore marriages in San Antonio by his power and for his glory. And one of the things I loved about that statement was it didn't say anything about us or me or even San Antonio Marriage Initiative. It was all about just knowing and trusting and believing that God was at work. He had not given up on marriage and that he would do a great work, and especially if we would join him in it. The other thing that we realized, especially as we properly assessed the size and the scope of the problem, was we realized we didn't need a program and we didn't even need an organization as much as we needed a marriage movement in the city. It was going to have to be something much larger than just what 2 or 3 or 5 people could do with some great programs. Because if we were going to reach 80,000 struggling marriages, how in the world would we do that with a program? It was going to take a movement. And this is something that God really impressed me with really early on, is that movement making is not so much about creating something new as it is about revealing what is already in place. This gets back to the great concepts that Henry Blackaby have advanced over the years, like experiencing God. God is already at work. Our job is simply to join him in his work. We knew that God was already at work, and I began my listening campaign by making one simple, easy commitment. This is all that it began with. The San Antonio Marriage Initiative began with the commitment just to meet 2 people a week. But what's interesting is if you'll meet 2 people a week for 3 years, you'll meet 300 people. And what surprised me, what shocked me is I thought I might meet 50 or 70 people who would tell me they were passionate about marriage. But in that first 3 years, I met 270 people. In fact, since that time, I've met over 1,000 people in my community who said to me, I care deeply about marriage, and I want to play my highest and best role to make a difference. So movement making is not so much about creating something new. It is about being a part of what God is already doing. This is a great quote by Rich Harwood, and he says that the answers are already in place in your community. You just need to find them. I could not agree more. So let's talk about movements. And I want to talk about movements because movements are so different than the experiences that we've had in all of our institutional experiences. We grew up in schools, right? That's an institutional setting. We often work in maybe corporate workplaces. That's an institutional setting. We solve problems with institutional systems, okay? So we live and breathe. In fact, we swim in the waters of an institutional movement. But over the last 20 years, quietly, we've become more of a network society because we have this thing now called the internet. Today, I'm meeting with people all around the country face to face using a free tool called Zoom, something we could not have even thought or imagined, except if maybe you watched the Jetsons growing up. I don't know how many people watched the Jetsons. I didn't, but I saw some good stuff there. But let's talk about movements and why they're so different. And we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about the difference in what makes a movement. And probably the most important thing to understand is that movements tend to be emergent. rather than predetermined. Emergent. Why? It's because one of the things I realized in the very, very beginning, as I patiently listened to 300 people, was that the same Holy Spirit that's in me is the same Holy Spirit that's in those 300 people, right? And the more I listen to other people and the Holy Spirit speaking through them, the more I become clear about the most important thing a movement leader can know, and that is, what is God doing? The most important thing a movement leader can know is, what is God doing? Because that is where you want to be. That's what you want to be a part of, is what is God doing? The second thing is, movements are advanced on a foundation of trust, respect, and mutual understanding. There's an organization called Fieldstone, and Fieldstone did a massive, what's called meta-research study on collaboration, working together. And they studied all the literature on all the research that had been done in the academic world and beyond on what makes working together. And what was so interesting was that far and away, the most important thing that advances collaboration is trust, respect, and mutual understanding. And that's a really personal thing to me, because I grew up in the Protestant world, and I'd spent my whole life, in the Protestant world. And through a patient season of prayer, God clearly told me the first thing I was going to do was I was going to go to the Archdiocese of San Antonio and meet the people who worked there serving and supporting marriages. And what was amazing about that is that, well, first of all, just to be honest, I thought, Lord, that's not what I was thinking would be the first step. But I went there and I met the two coolest guys you can imagine, Jake Samore and Steve Picorni, who led the Office of Marriage and Family. And I had no idea. I'd never been in an archdiocese in my life. I didn't know what it was like or what I would expect. And Nora Rodriguez is on this call, and she'll affirm and tell you that Jake and Steve were just the most delightful, visionary, passionate guys you could meet. And we developed the finest relationship you can imagine. And that's what began the San Antonio Marriage Initiative. And I came away with mutual understanding. I came away with the greatest level of respect for those two men, for the Catholic Church, and how serious the Catholic Church is about marriage, and all that the Catholic Church does, the hierarchy they have, just all the things that they have in place. It really enhanced my mutual understanding of them. And they began to appreciate me as well, despite all the silly things that I do. Okay. The third thing to remember is living systems are an approach that require fluid leadership. And this scares people a lot, is because, like, we're used to working in a very strategic way. Okay. And a lot of people were asking me in the very beginning, like, well, where are we going? What's this going to look like in 3 years? What's this going to look like 5 years? What's your 10-year plan? All this very institutional strategery, so to speak. And it made them uncomfortable with me to say, you know what? I don't know, because I'm not going to set the vision. And they're like, what? I said, yeah, I'm not going to set the vision for this. I'm going to be the stewardship, right? I'm going to be the steward of the collective vision of God's people. Well, people looked at me like I was nuts. But that's the most powerful thing you can do, is to be a steward of the collective vision. And we're going to talk about co-creation and why that's so essential to that. But movements also are a place where people connect around relationships and shared vision. And movements ultimately are a process of co-creation. That's really, really powerful. And co-creation is very, very different than an institutional approach to solving problems. It's not that we don't need our institutions. It's that institutions need to be only a component of all that we do. They need to be a component of the bigger movement and mission of the marriage initiative. All right. So all right. And I want to double down on this idea of co-creation. Movements have the potential to be much more sustainable than institutional systems. I've heard them described as lasting. And why is it? It's because people own what they help to create. Movements give you a place to co-create with others a better future. And so the process of co-creation has to be woven into everything that you do. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the broader steps in a movement that expand beyond just listening, because listening happens in the discover stage. But also, as Stephanie said, listening continues through connect and activate. Well, let's talk a little bit more broadly about what movements are and the structure of how movements work. Movements are very organic, but they also tend to be structural. So let's talk about each element of the structure. The discovery. Again, in discovery, you're spending a lot of time listening and not telling. You're spending most of your time listening and not telling. And when I've helped people build listening campaigns, one of the things I encourage them is that in all of your listening, never occupy more than 10% of the conversation. Really, really hear from people. Listening helps you define the opportunities and understand the roadblocks that you're facing. But more than anything, as I said before, the most important part of discovery is to understand what is God doing. And I love this next quote. That discovery is more than just finding the right people. A lot of people think of listening campaigns and discovery as like, well, we got to find the people. Yes, you do. But discovery is where God begins to reveal the playbook for the way forward. God's going to share his plan through the faithfulness of what he has shared with his people. God will reveal the playbook for the way forward. That's what's going to define discovery, and what we learn in the discovery is going to define how do we move to our next step, which is to connect. After you've done a patient season of discovery, connecting is about convening. It's about bringing people together. It's about bringing more clarity. Okay, what are the most common problems that we're facing? And who has the best practices to share to solve those problems? It's really about how we explore the solutions together. And so what I like to say about a movement leader is a movement leader, especially in the connect phase, is the job of a movement leader is to facilitate a process where your people co-create a better future together. Again, because people own what they help to create. And this is so important, especially in the world of family strengthening. The breakdown of the family is a old, complex problem. It's called a multivariant problem, and it's constantly evolving. And then very, very complex issues. The solutions tend to be emergent rather than predetermined. The more you listen, the more you hear, the more you involve the expertise of others, the more you're able to really craft a plan to advance this movement. And so finally, activate. And we continue to listen extensively in the activate stage. But activate is helping everyone find their highest and best role to play. What's the best role for each of us, especially as we think broadly across the entire collaborative movement? I love this quote that says, large-scale social change requires broad, cross-sector collaboration, not the isolated intervention of individual organizations. It's going to take all of us working together. It's going to take people in the family law community, in the medical community, in the business community, in the donor community, in the church community, in the education community. It's going to take a broad, multi-sector approach with all of us helping each other and serving one another with surprising generosity. So activate is helping people find their best role, providing a support system, what in the social science they call backbone support, and then constantly communicating. What is it that we're doing together? What's our shared purpose that we're moving together with? Constantly reminding people of why we're doing this together. So a different definition of activate is leading a process of change management. There's been entire books and there's entire industries built around change management, but it's leading a process of change in our community by serving the collaborative partners with a level of backbone support. So discover, connect, and activate. Now, I want to go to this slide because I want to compare and contrast. I want to compare institutional systems, which tend to be hierarchical, with networks that tend to be decentralized. So let's just kind of walk through this and just do a compare and contrast. Hierarchies tend to have power structures that are top down. Networks or movements have power structures that are distributed. Hierarchies tend to be command and control, whereas movements or networks tend to be let's connect and collaborate. Hierarchies lead with directive leadership. We're going to tell you what to do because we're the experts. Have you ever been a part of that? Where the leaders go away, they dream, and they come back selling us on their dream. It's like, well, you didn't listen to what I had to say. But it's directive leadership. And we're going to use the power structures in our place to direct us. Whereas leadership in movements tends to be collaborative leadership. In hierarchies, there's a deliberate strategy, like we've said, whereas in movements, it tends to be an emergent strategy. In hierarchies, the work is task-oriented, whereas in movements, the work is relationship-oriented. In hierarchies or institutions, you scale up the work, you scale it up, whereas in networks or movements, you scale it out. It's a radically different approach to accomplishing big, major, audacious goals. So I want to just recap just for a moment. Some of the principles for leading a movement is that it always begins in listening and it always continues in listening. And there's always an emphasis on what I call vision forming questions. And as a leader, you're constantly understanding what God is doing and you're sharing that back with vision forming language. This was a really key to how I followed up with most all of my listening sessions, especially in the beginning. One of the challenges I gave myself in listening was that I wanted to spend an equal amount of time debriefing as I'd spent in the listening session. So if I spent an hour with someone and listening to what their vision is, then I would spend an hour in the debrief and I would write them a follow-up email. And in that email, I would communicate the vision of what I saw in them. And I would say something like, I would affirm the things that I saw in them, because a lot of times people don't see what you see in them, right? And so I wanted to affirm in them the things I saw in them. I wanted to affirm in them, because this is really important. I want to emphasize this. People are not listening in communities. But if you're listening well, you have a perspective that no one has. And because you have a perspective that no one has, you can see things that are happening that no one else is seeing, and you can see individually in people maybe something they don't see in themselves. Like, for instance, when I told our divorce attorneys in our city that there was a role that they could play in helping couples avoid divorce, they thought I was crazy. But when I told them that they could change their intake protocol by asking a simple question, is there any hope for this marriage? That they could actually play a highest and best role by diverting that couple into a different process, sending them to an intensive or discernment counseling, changing the track that this couple was on. So I saw in them something that was really powerful. And we actually wrote a feature article about an attorney that was doing this really well. And that feature article is based on the writing genre called Hero's Journey. We set him up as someone that other people could see vision in. So it's all about casting vision and asking vision forming questions. And of course, coming back to our slide here, leading a movement always acknowledges the shifted order. It's a work of stewardship. Leading a movement is all about creating a generous culture. I had a guy reach out to me 2 weeks ago and he said, Carl, it's really crazy. He said, I've never been a part of a group of people who seem to be so generous with others. And what I told him is that's one of our core values, is to serve with surprising generosity, because as a movement leader, you're setting the standard for generosity. And so you're creating a generous culture so that people will help each other. Again, co-creation is woven into every step, and you're constantly reminding people of the shared purpose. Now, as I finish, I want to have Stephanie send you this video, and I want to give you a disclaimer first. This is not a faith-based video. But this is a beautifully done 19-minute video on impact networks, which is really like, it's a different term for movement. There's a lot of different words that people are using. Some people call this collective impact. Some people call it movement. Some people call it networks or impact networks. This is not a faith-based video, but it's a beautiful video that helps really reaffirm in you how different movements are and the power of movements. And you'll see some really beautiful stories of people doing work at the highest level. So as I finish today, this is what I want to remind you of. And this, we just need to internalize this, is that in the world around us, marriage is our most profound earthly relationship, right? It's our most profound relationship. Marriage is the most significant commitment we make to another person. And yet, the church is largely silent, right? And even from a societal standpoint, it's been said that if divorce was a disease, we would declare a national emergency, right? And yet, now with that, those three items, now think about this. And yet, you can walk into almost any city in the country, set up a marriage initiative, and have no competition. Isn't that amazing? Isn't it amazing? The most important relationship in our lives is a relationship that there's almost no infrastructure to support, especially at a community level. So I want to say this to you, each of you, is I think of you as a remnant, of faithful people who haven't forgotten one of God's most prized elements of his creation. Because being a part of what God is doing could be one of the most compelling ways for each of us to live our lifetime. And I love this saying, which is that we're called to live each day in light of eternity. I think we're doing a work that matters for all of eternity. And as I think of living every day in light of eternity, I think of each of you and I say, you are. So thank you, friends.
Well, thank you, Carl. That was so valuable. I know that everybody loved hearing from you. So thank you so much. Well, all right, now it's time for our Q&A session. And if you have questions for Carl, or if you would like to share your experience, maybe it could be challenges you faced, or maybe successful strategies you have on the subject of listening campaigns, this is your opportunity to share or ask any questions that you may have. So if you would go ahead and raise your virtual hands, I'll call on you. But while you're raising your virtual hands, I do want to let you know that our guest speaker for next month is going to be Brad Rhodes of Grace Marriage, and he's going to be covering how to build and sustain relationships with pastors and how to frame marriage ministries for the eyes of a pastor. So you're going to want to mark your calendars for that, and you're going to really enjoy hearing from Brad. So do we have any questions today? I'm looking around to see if I see any hands raised. All right, Keith.
Carl, thank you, brother. We can naturally make some of the connections between listening campaigns and movements. How would you describe the value and the fuel that listening campaigns bring to a movement?
Well, thank you, Keith. And by the way, this Keith Tully here is one of my favorite people on planet Earth. And so Keith, yeah, listening well, again, helps us really understand and lead in the right direction, obviously. But it also, again, it is so powerful in building trust. Everything advances at the speed of trust. I love Scott's quote about trust. And so that is really key. But it's also, every part of the movement is really defined by the things that we're hearing. And the other thing is that people really trust a leader who's willing to listen first. And when people feel heard, it really helps. So I think it is absolutely foundational. And where I've seen the listening campaigns cut short, I've seen those next steps really struggle, Keith.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your question, Keith. Do we have any other questions, or anyone who would just like to share their experience with listening campaigns? Either way. All right, Mary.
Hi, everyone. This is my first time. It's so wonderful to be here. And Carl, you speak my language. So I live in the Rochester, New York area, and I'm curious about how long you, because I've done listening campaigns for different reasons, different things, really just to hear and understand. So I'm curious, do you sort of map out a timeline and set up who you're looking for? I know it can be organic with what God puts, but I'm curious how you frame that. You don't want to cut it short. So how long is a good timeline, or just your thoughts?
Thank you, Mary. And wow, love Rochester, New York. What a beautiful place. And I really like the idea of a strategic listening campaign involving a team. I love the idea of 3 or more people being involved in a campaign. And I love for people to set goals for listening. I always say, if a team, they need to have 1 coffee a week. If you're not having 1 coffee a week, you're not listening enough. Ideally 2 a week. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to wear people out with it. You want to keep things fresh, but I like a team approach. And what I've done in a team approach, and I've seen and equipped other teams to do it, is I like the idea of the team listening and then comparing notes either once a week or at least once a month. Because when we compare notes, when we do the getting together and comparing notes, I always like to say, okay, now here's what we've heard. Now, as a team, what do we think God's doing? What do we see God doing? And this is what I've seen, and this is, to me, one of the most exciting things about listening campaigns, is that God is faithful. He always makes the way forward very clear. And a lot of people don't like the ambiguity of like pressing forward without knowing exactly where we're going to go and exactly what's going to happen. People don't like the ambiguity. And I have to tell our team members, you've got to embrace the ambiguity. But what's so exciting is God will show up. And this is what I know about God. God is not a God of chaos. He is a God of order. And every time we launch a listening campaign, it is so amazing and is so rewarding that it is abundantly clear as to what God is doing. We've been running a listening campaign just recently in the family policy space. And we started this about 3 months ago. We're listening to all these great leaders around the country that Tom Pritchard, has connected us to, and others, people in the family policy space. And I told the team, God's going to be very clear about what he's doing and how we're going to serve this community of people. And by golly, he has. So it's really just trusting the process. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks for your question, Mary. All right, Bill and Ann, I see you have your hand raised.
First, just a big thank you to both Scott and Carl for the not just mouthful of information, but barrel full and any other word you can use with so many great ideas. In everything you said, one thing I thought, we're all taught to be good listeners and we work on listening skills, but what would be some goals or thoughts in developing the person you're talking to have good listening skills to what you're saying? I mean, you might listen, but how do you help them become good listeners so they hear your message?
That's a great question, Bill. I think you've got me stumped, because I don't think I require it, but it does create a culture. Rich Harwood, there's a great phrase that Rich Harwood used, and he's this great community organizer. He said that when we work in the communities, we need to be outward facing. Because most of us are in institutional settings that are very siloed and very inward facing. So we're not listening to one another. But as you model it, I think you're setting a standard for what's possible. Bill, I don't think I've done a good job of like training people to be good listeners in terms of like broadly in a particular city movement. And that's something we need to work on. Good question.
We're looking for where God might already be working with people to help them be the listeners they need to be.
Yeah. Well, and Bill, you've been doing this in your community for decades now, and I know you've sat and listened with a lot of good people and done it really well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, Bill. We just love Bill and Ann. And I see Tom has his hand raised. Tom?
Yeah, I jumped on a little bit late, so maybe my question has already been answered. But Carl, are there particular, let's say on the listening campaigns, are the set of questions one asks the same for all listening campaigns, or do they vary based on what, like in our work, would the list of questions change based on the development of our work or or who we're talking to, or and are those 5 questions we've talked about? Tell us about what you're doing, what got you to this point, what are you excited about, what challenges you're facing, and how can I help? And
yeah, I really think Scott did a great job in his video, talking about a couple different styles, and because the questions do change whether it's an individual or group setting. And Scott really talked about a lot of questions and methods that work really well in a group setting. You're more of a facilitator of a conversation. In the individual setting, and I really love the individual setting. The individual setting leads to the group setting. That's probably something I really should communicate better, is that while I always begin with individual listening sessions, it always becomes a group setting. And I do change the questions a little bit. But my favorite setting is the individual setting. And Tom, that's a great question, because I do always begin with my 5 standard questions, but I also take the liberty to adapt and change if I need to. And the other thing that I think it's important, Tom, is that I do adapt the actual language of the questions depending on the sector that I'm speaking with. So the family law sector is just to be really honest here, it's a very professional, it's kind of a cold environment. They don't call each other brother and sister, they call each other colleagues. They have a whole different language set that they use. And so I will adapt the questions, the language of the questions, the words of the questions a little bit, kind of like depending on the sector. If I'm talking to a school administrator, the language is going to be much more professional and kind of high bar type language. And I'll use a lot of language that'll adapt to that. Whereas if it's a church sector, it's much more informal. It's much more like we're brothers and sisters in Christ type thing. So great question. And I do adapt a little bit. But this I know, Tom, by knowing my 5 questions, I always walk in with a plan. And I have those questions memorized. And sometimes I'll just be in a situation where a conversation will just begin impromptu, and that's okay because I've got a plan.
Thank you for your question, Tom. Do we have any other questions or anyone who would just like to share their experience with listening campaigns before we end the call today?
I talked to 2 really professional titled people recently, and I walked away really focusing on listening really hard. And I found myself thinking, they never once asked me one question about myself. But I thought that's okay, because I know about them. They heard me, they felt heard and understood, and we'll connect again. But they ended up feeling in a safe place where they could share what needed to be shared and just bounce the things off that needed to be shared with me. And I felt kind of, it was just really weird to remind myself that really is my purpose. It is not about me ever. It is really all about that other person. And so it was kind of a privilege to be that person for them. It's not something that comes naturally, though, I'll be honest with you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Amy. That's a really good point and something that I'm sure everybody needs to work on at some point. So thank you so much for sharing. All right, then I guess that concludes our training event on listening campaigns. And remember, if you guys need anything or if you have any feedback at all on today's event, you can contact me at steph@marriageinitiative.org. I really would love to hear from all of you, and also be on the lookout for my follow-up email that I'll be sending to you next week. And I just want to say thank you guys all for joining us today. You guys have a great weekend. We love you, and we're so grateful that you're a part of the CMI family. Bye.